Hey everyone, and welcome to another video where today I'm going to be sharing my favourite 2020 book releases. So these are all books that I read in 2020 that were also released in 2020, and I've tried to narrow this list down as much as I can, but I read a lot of books this year and I also read a lot of books that I liked this year, so I think I've got it down to about 12, and there's a mix of genres. Most of them I think are contemporary fiction, but then I've also got a few thrillers and a few romance books. Some of these books I read quite recently, and so I have mentioned them in videos before, but I will leave timestamps in the description, so if there's any point that you want to flick ahead, then you can. I also realised that I don't actually own physical copies of any of these books because I either read them on my Kindle or I borrowed them from my library, so I just thought I'd mention that as well, just in case anyone was wondering why I don't actually own these books. But anyway, the first book that I want to talk about is In 5 Years by Rebecca Serle, and I'm not mentioning these in any particular order, but this just so happened to be the first book that I gave 5 stars this year. I think I read this in January. This book follows a woman called Dani who's a lawyer living in New York, and she's pretty sure that she knows exactly the direction that her life is going to go. At the start of the book, she's just been for a job interview at her dream job, and then later that day she gets engaged to her boyfriend, and so things are going pretty well. But then that evening she falls asleep on the sofa and she wakes up in this dream to find that 5 years have gone past and she's in this completely different apartment with a guy who is definitely not her boyfriend or her fiance. But an hour later she wakes up to find that she's back in her normal life, and the experience kind of shakes her a little bit, but she puts it to the back of her mind and moves on with her life until 4.5 years later when she meets this man from her dream. I can remember reading the summary for this book and thinking that it was going to be a bit of a cheesy romance, but it's really not, and I think it's important to go into the book knowing that it's not a romance. It's more a book about friendship, and it's really interesting because it shows the way that your life can change so quickly within a short space of time. When I first started this book, I was really confused because I couldn't work out the direction that it was going in, and for the first maybe 40 to 50%, I wasn't liking what I thought was going to happen, but then it took a completely different turn that I wasn't expecting, and by the end I absolutely loved it. Overall, I really liked the message that it was trying to get across, and I would really recommend this if you like contemporary fiction. The next book on my list is Such a Fun Age by Kiley Reid, and this is another contemporary fiction book that I read early this year because I saw so many people talking about it and it sounded really interesting. So this book is about 2 women, Alex and Amira, and Alex, or Alex I think is how she likes to be called. She's a wealthy white woman. She's a blogger, a lifestyle blogger who's trying to write her first book, and one evening she calls up Amira, who is a young black woman who is her babysitter. She calls her up and says, can you please take one of my kids out just for a walk because we're having a bit of a family emergency and I need to get her out of the house. And Amira agrees because she really needs the money, and she takes this little girl, Briar I think her name is, out to the nearby supermarket. And while they're there, she's stopped by a security guard and accused of kidnapping this little child that she's babysitting. The whole situation is cleared up quite quickly, but Amira really wants to just forget what happened. But Alex becomes almost obsessed with trying to put things right, even though that isn't what Amira wants. What I really liked about this book was the way that the perspective switches back and forth. So you see both Alex's perspective and Amira's perspective, and you get to see inside their heads and what they're thinking at any particular time. The main theme throughout this book is white saviorism, and I thought that it was really interesting to see how Alex was so convinced that she was doing the right thing when actually her actions were at times very selfish and very self-serving. The writing in this was really simple, but in a way that means that it was quite quick to read, even though it's not a fast-paced book. I'm pretty sure this is also a debut novel, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what the author comes out with next. The next book I'm going to talk about is Olive by Emma Gannon, and I've been following Emma for years on Twitter, and I used to read her blog, and so I really like her writing. And when she announced that she was coming out with this fiction book, I was really excited because it sounded like something that I would enjoy, and I did. So this book follows a woman called Olive who has been best friends with Bea, Cecily and Isla. I think those are her friends' names. The 4 of them have been really close since they were at uni. They actually used to live together when they were at uni, but now that they're in their early 30s, Olive has started to notice that their lives are going in very different directions. One of her friends is married with 3 kids, the other is pregnant with her first child, and the other is currently going through IVF, whereas Olive is pretty sure that she never wants to have children. And because the book is mostly told from Olive's perspective, you get to see inside her thoughts and feelings around her decision to remain child-free. I think the reason that I liked this book so much is because I could relate to the main character so much. I've always known that I never want to have kids, and I've never read a main character like that. And a lot of what Olive goes through are things that I have also experienced and things that people have also said to me, like, oh, you'll change your mind when you're older. And I think, well, no, I'm 30 and still don't want to have kids. Olive's thoughts and feelings were so close to my own, and I think that if you're in a similar situation, then you'd find this book really relatable. Okay, so the next book on my list is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell, and I feel a bit weird including this book on my list because it's one that I've spoken about before, and it's not a book that I would openly recommend to everyone just because of the subject matter and the fact that it is so uncomfortable to read. The story follows a woman called Vanessa who was 15 when she was groomed by her 42-year-old English teacher, and now she's in her early 30s, and another student at the same school who was a few years younger than Vanessa has accused this same English teacher of sexual abuse. Vanessa has always insisted that she wasn't a victim and that their relationship was this great love affair, even though obviously it wasn't, and throughout the book it flicks back and forth between Vanessa as a 15-year-old and Vanessa in the present day as she tries to reevaluate her feelings over what actually happened to her. I think one of the main reasons why this book was so powerful is that it's told from the first person perspective, and so you get to see inside Vanessa's head and you experience what she experiences. And I think that's also one of the reasons why this book is so difficult to read in places. I don't know whether graphic is the right way to describe this book, but it doesn't hold back on the details, and so I would say be very careful if you are planning to read this book. It did make me feel really uncomfortable, but I think the fact that it made me feel so unnerved just goes to show how well it was written. The next book on my list is The Vanishing Half by Brit Bennett, and this is a story about twin sisters who grew up in this southern black community where having darker skin is seen as undesirable, to the point where over time the people within the town have intermarried with the intent of deliberately making it so that younger generations will have lighter and lighter skin. And these twins have very light skin to the point where they could pass for being white. When the twins were 16, they both ran away from home, and they ended up going in very different directions because while one of the twins, Stella, married a white man and started living her life as a white woman, the other twin, Desiree, started a relationship with a dark-skinned man, and they had a daughter together who also has very dark skin. I really liked the way that this book was structured and how you got the different perspectives, because even though it's a very character-driven book, it didn't feel that slow to me. Maybe the first few chapters, but once I started to feel invested in their stories, I found that I was reading it quite quickly because I wanted to find out what was going to happen. The plot has so many different layers and it's so complex and just really interesting the way that it explores these different themes around colorism and around the way that LGBTQ plus people were treated during that time period, because the book starts in the 1960s and you follow these characters throughout the decades, and then I think it ends at some point in the 1990s. But yeah, I really enjoyed this book. I'm pretty sure I gave it 5 stars because I couldn't think of a reason not to. It's one of my favourite books that I've read this year. I'm also pretty sure that it won the Goodreads Choice Award for historical fiction. So yeah, if you've not read this book, then I definitely recommend looking into it. The next book on my list is The Midnight Library by Matt Haig, and this actually won the Goodreads Choice Award this year for fiction, and I can definitely see why, because I really enjoyed it and I know that a lot of other people did too. So throughout this book we're following a woman called Nora who has a lot of regrets in her life, and she's going through a really difficult time, and it's reached a point where she feels that her only option is to take her own life. And she finds herself in this place called the Midnight Library, which is a space in between life and death, where all of the books in this library tell a story of what your life could have been like if you'd made a different choice. And so Nora is given this opportunity to try out all of these different lives that she could have lived. For example, if she'd married her ex-partner instead of breaking off the wedding and things like that. This book does have content warnings for suicide and depression. However, I felt that the writing was very gentle and it was very well written. It was very beautifully written. I really liked the overall message that it was trying to get across, and I think that a lot of people will find it relatable, especially the parts that looked at regret and how we go through life carrying these regrets, always wondering what could have been. I don't think I've actually come across anyone who didn't like this book, and it actually reminded me a lot of the film It's a Wonderful Life, which is one of my favourite Christmas films. I think that if you like books that explore those kind of topics, then you'd really, really appreciate this, and I think you'd really like it. The next book on my list is All the Rage by Cara Hunter, and this is the 4th book in the D.I. Adam Fawley series, which is a British crime thriller series set in Oxford. Each of these books is its own story, so you could technically read them as a standalone, although I love this series, so I would definitely recommend going back and starting at the beginning. So at the start of this book, a teenage girl is found wandering down this main road on the outskirts of Oxford, and it turns out that she was abducted. She was grabbed off the street, forced into a van and driven to this remote location where it sounds like she was assaulted, but she's not really cooperating with the police and she doesn't want to press charges. And so D.I. Adam Fawley and the team don't really know what else they can do until another girl also goes missing, and so it seems like there's more going on than they first thought. I feel like the summary to this makes it sound like a really generic thriller, but it's not. I really love the way that Cara Hunter writes the plots of her stories because they're so twisty and there's so many different layers, and the way that you start a book isn't how it ends. They always go off in this direction that you just don't see coming. Even though I really liked the first 3 books in this series, I do think that All the Rage was my favourite. I gave it 5 stars, and I think the first 3 books I gave 4 stars, which is obviously still a great rating. I'm pretty sure that I read all 4 of the books in the space of a week because I just couldn't put them down. I would, however, recommend checking the trigger warnings beforehand because it's been nearly a year since I read these books and I can't remember how graphic they were. I'm pretty sure that they are a little unsettling in places, and so just something to be aware of if you are thinking of reading this series. Okay, so these next few books I'm going to talk about, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned quite a lot in recent videos, but I did really, really love them, and so I do still want to include them in this video just to wrap things up. So the next book on my list is Home Before Dark by Riley Sager, and if you saw my November wrap up then you'd have seen me going on about how much I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars and it's one of my favourite thrillers that I've read this year, although I was having a look on Goodreads and I think on there it's described as a horror, but I don't know whether I'd agree with that. I'd say that it is more of a suspenseful mystery thriller. This book follows a woman called Maggie who, when she was 5 years old, she lived in this house with her parents that was supposedly haunted, and her dad wrote a book about their experience that became this bestseller and very similar to the Amityville Horror. But Maggie's never been able to remember what happened, and so she's always suspected that her parents made the whole thing up because they wanted to make a load of money. Now that her dad has passed away, Maggie has inherited this house that she didn't know that her dad actually still owned, and so she decides to go back to this house for the first time since she was a kid to renovate it, do it up with the intention of selling it on. But when she arrives, this weird stuff starts to happen and she starts to think maybe her dad was right and the house actually is haunted. What I really liked about this book is that it's a book within a book because you get Maggie's perspective in the present, but then you also get alternating chapters that are taken from Maggie's dad's book. I don't give many thrillers 5 stars, but this one definitely deserved it because it kept me guessing and I loved the tension and the suspense, and if you like the TV show The Haunting of Hill House then I think you'd really like this and I definitely recommend giving it a go. The next book on my list is Crescent City by Sarah J Maas, and I actually did a whole dedicated reading vlog to this that I was watching it back and I think it might come across that I didn't like this book or that I didn't enjoy it, which isn't true. I really, really liked this book, but I think when I'm doing reading vlogs it's quite easy for me to be overly critical, and it wasn't perfect at all. But I read Sarah J Maas's books because I want to be entertained, and this was definitely entertaining. This book follows a woman called Bryce who is half human, half fae, and she lives in this place called Crescent City. And when her friends are murdered by a demon, she teams up with a fallen angel to investigate what happened. What I really liked about this book was the chemistry between the 2 main characters. I think Sarah J Maas does a really good job of writing good banter between characters and building their relationships. The setting of Crescent City was also really cool because it's set in this world where you have all these different supernatural creatures like fae and angels, but also shifters and vampires and witches and pretty much anything that you could imagine. I'm really looking forward to reading the sequel to this, which I think comes out in 2021 at some point, because the ending left me with quite a lot of questions and I'm really looking forward to seeing the direction that it goes in next. Also, I've just realised that I've been calling this book Crescent City when I know that it's called House of Earth and Blood. Does anyone else keep doing that? It's really annoying me, the name of this book, because of the way that it's done on the cover. Why would you have Crescent City in huge writing and then the actual title of the book in teeny tiny writing? It just makes no sense. I'm really sorry. ran over. The next book on my list is Beach Read by Emily Henry, and this is a romance book about two authors, Augustus and January, and they end up living in neighbouring beach houses one summer when they're both really struggling with writer's block, and they get to talking and they decide that a really great way for them to get through writer's block is if they swap genres, because January writes best-selling romance books whereas Augustus, or Gus, writes gritty literary fiction, and so they decide to do a swap just for the summer to see if it helps them. I think this is easily one of my favourite romance books that I've read this year because I loved the chemistry between the two main characters, and I like how throughout the book they take each other on these research dates to investigate and research their new books, and it was just really fun to read. They had a really good playful banter going on, and I love romance books where you have that really good banter, but also where you have a little bit of depth, because both Gus and January have experienced pain in their past, and January in particular, at the start of the book, you learn that the reason that she's at this beach house is because her dad recently passed away, and she learned that he had this whole other life that she knew nothing about, and so throughout the book she's also trying to process that and come to terms with it. And so yeah, I enjoyed this book a lot more than I was expecting. I'm pretty sure that I gave it 5 stars, and I'd really recommend this if you like the whole enemies to lovers trope, because I think it does it really well. The next book on my list is Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert, and this is another adult romance book about a woman called Dani Brown who is pretty sure that she doesn't want a relationship. She's looking for more of a friends with benefits type situation, and one day she's at work when she gets stuck in a lift and she's rescued by her friend Zaf, who is a security guard in the same building, and people think it's really cute and a few people video them, and it ends up going viral on Twitter, and Zaf asks Dani to pretend to be his girlfriend just for a little while so that they can take advantage of the publicity to promote his charity. Talia Hibbert has become one of my favourite romance authors, even though I don't know if I can say that yet because I've only read 2 of her books, but I definitely want to read more because I love the way that she writes characters that you just fall in love with. This is technically the second book in a series, but it's a companion novel, so you can read it without having read the first book and it won't make any difference. The first book in the series follows Dani's older sister Chloe, and then this follows Dani, and then there's another book coming out next year that follows their youngest sister Eve, and I'm really looking forward to that. I've heard so many good things already and I'm pretty sure that I'm going to love it. So the final book on my list is One to Watch by Stayman-London, and this follows a plus-size blogger called B, who is a really big fan of this reality TV show that sounds very similar to The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, and one evening she settles down to watch the new series of the show and she notices that there's a real lack of diversity within the show and within the contestants, and she writes about it online, and this post goes viral and it causes the producers of the show to get in touch with her to ask her if she would like to be the star of the next series. This book was actually recommended to me by my cousin, and it just so happened at the time that she was talking to me about it, I was in between books and I was really in the mood for a contemporary romance, and so I downloaded it pretty much straight away and I got stuck in and I finished it within a day because I was just so addicted. It felt almost like I was watching a reality TV show but reading about it instead. The story does very much centre around B, and I liked her as a main character. I liked that she wasn't perfect and that she did have flaws, and she went on this journey throughout the story. Throughout the book you also get this outside commentary. You see tweets and texts and things like that from people who are watching the show and making comments about it, and I thought that was really interesting because it helped to bring it to life. I don't think I've ever actually watched The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, but I do really like reality TV in general, and so I think if you like shows like that then you would really enjoy this. Although I would just say that bear in mind there is a trigger warning for this book for fat phobia, because as I mentioned you get this external commentary with people tweeting about the show and giving their opinions, and some of the comments about B are very positive, but you also get some comments that are quite negative. It shows both, and so just bear that in mind if you are thinking of reading this. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the video. Thanks for watching if you've made it this far, especially because I feel like I've been talking for quite a while, and so I have no idea how long this video is going to be. But if you've read any of the books that I mentioned on my list, then please let me know in the comments down below what you thought of them. Let me know as well if there's any other books that you read this year that you'd recommend. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. Click subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!